There is a version of you that you have never introduced to anyone, not because you forgot it existed, but because a long time ago, you made a decision, quiet, unconscious, absolute, that this part of you was too dangerous to let out, too ugly, too needy, too much. And so you buried it. You built walls, then wallpaper over the walls, then furniture against the wallpaper. You became, to the outside world, a person of composure, and the buried thing went silent. What you did not understand then, what almost no one understands until it is almost too late, is that silence is not the same as absence. The buried thing did not die. It learned to drive. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Marcus. His name is Marcus, and at 34, he had constructed something most people spend their lives reaching for. A well-paying career in financial consulting, a clean apartment in a city that rewarded ambition, a social circle that described him with words like dependable and put together. He exercised at 6 in the morning with the mechanical reliability of a tide. He returned calls promptly. He said the right things at the right times. If you had met him at a dinner party, you would have thought, there is a man who has figured something out. But there were anomalies, small, almost invisible fractures in the architecture. He could not finish novels, not because he lacked intelligence, but because something about sustained emotional immersion in another person's inner world made his chest constrict in a way he could never explain. He would cancel plans, sometimes at the last moment, with excuses that sounded reasonable but felt, even to him, like retreating behind glass. And once a month, without any predictable trigger, he would find himself sitting on his bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, not crying, not panicking, just sitting, empty, like a room after a fire when everything flammable has already burned. He did not tell anyone about the bathroom floor. That was the agreement he had made with himself, though he had never consciously made it. The agreement was this: whatever lives in that room stays in that room. The rest of Marcus, the reliable, composed, early-rising Marcus, would continue forward without comment. This is where we begin. Not with his breakdown, not with his childhood, not yet, but with the most ordinary Monday morning imaginable, because that is when the shadow makes its most important moves. Not in the dramatic moments, in the invisible ones. Chapter 2. The thing Carl Jung called the shadow. Carl Jung spent much of his career trying to describe something that every person knows intuitively, but almost no one is willing to examine directly. He called it the shadow, not a metaphor for evil, not a synonym for weakness. The shadow in Jungian psychology is the sum of everything the psyche has decided is unacceptable. The emotions, the desires, the impulses, the wounds, and exiled from conscious identity. It is the self that was not permitted to exist. The mechanism is simple, and it begins very early. A child discovers, through 1,000 small and large events, that certain parts of them produce love and safety, while other parts produce rejection, punishment, or cold indifference. The logical response, and it is logical, this is important to understand, is to perform whatever produces safety and to hide whatever produces danger. This is not weakness. This is adaptation. This is the psyche doing exactly what it is built to do. Survive the environment it finds itself in. But the cost arrives later, and it arrives silently. What gets repressed does not evaporate. The psychologist's term for this is the return of the repressed, the observation that what we exile from consciousness does not stay exiled. It finds other corridors. It speaks through the body, through compulsion, through the people we inexplicably despise, through the relationships we unconsciously destroy, through the panic that arrives without warning in a perfectly quiet moment. Jung wrote something that deserves to be read slowly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Read that again. What he is describing is not mysticism. He is describing the precise psychological mechanism by which Marcus ends up on his bathroom floor, by which intelligent people make the same self-defeating choices for decades, by which men and women who desperately want intimacy systematically ensure they never achieve it. The shadow does not announce itself. It operates through what appears to be your free will. Chapter 3. The Grammar of Repression. Marcus was 7 years old when his father lost his job. He remembers the dinner table getting quieter. He remembers his mother's face doing something that he could not name at the time, but now recognizes as suppressed terror. He remembers crying once, loudly over something inconsequential, a broken toy, and his father turning to him with a look that was not angry, but was somehow worse than anger. It was exhausted, depleted, as if Marcus's tears were one more demand the world was making on a man who had nothing left to give. He stopped crying after that, not immediately. Children do not make these decisions as decisions. They make them as feelings, a slow, cellular understanding that certain expressions of self produce a particular atmospheric pressure in a room, and that pressure is intolerable. So the crying went somewhere, not away, somewhere. And into the space where the crying had been, something else arrived. Performance, competence, the straight back, the clear answer, the never needing help. These things received warmth. He learned the grammar of acceptable selfhood in that house, and he became fluent. By the time Marcus was an adult, the repression was so structurally complete that he did not experience it as repression. He experienced it as personality. He genuinely believed that he was someone who did not need much from other people. He believed that emotional self-sufficiency was simply a character trait he had been born with, the same way some people are born with a preference for cold weather. He had no memory of the dinner table. He had no memory of the decision. But every morning at 6, he rose and performed the proof of it again. This is what makes the shadow so formidable. It does not feel like a wound wearing a mask. It feels like a self. Chapter 4. The Cost of Composure. 6 months before the story shifts, Marcus's firm hired a new analyst. Her name was Nadia. She was perceptive, direct, and entirely unbothered by social performance. The kind of person who would say the true thing in a meeting where everyone else was carefully saying the tolerable thing. She was not aggressive. She was simply unafraid of being seen. And Marcus, to his bewilderment, found himself unable to be in the same room with her without a low, unlocatable irritation stirring in his chest. He told himself it was a professional friction, a difference in communication styles. His mind, well-trained in reasonable explanation, supplied the paperwork. But the irritation had a texture to it that pure professional disagreement does not have. Something personal, something almost physical, a tightness in the jaw, a slight elevation in heart rate when she spoke. He caught himself cataloging her flaws with a vigilance that embarrassed him when he noticed it. What he did not understand, what the Jungian framework makes almost uncomfortably clear, is that what we most despise in others is frequently the precise quality we have most ruthlessly exiled from ourselves. This is called projection. The shadow, unable to exist within, gets thrown outward and locates itself in another person, where it can be examined, managed, even attacked, at a safe distance from the self. Nadia was not the problem. Nadia was the mirror. Her comfort with vulnerability, with being visibly human, with needing things and saying so. These were the exact qualities that Marcus had sentenced to internal exile at age 7, and seeing them in her was like watching a fugitive walk free. The cold hands, the grinding teeth at night, the sleep that never fully arrived. The body knows. It always knows before the mind will admit it. Chapter 5. The Counterargument. When repression works, here is where the lecture must pause, because there is something dishonest in the way this subject is usually discussed, and that dishonesty deserves to be confronted directly. Not all repression is pathological. Not all shadow work is urgent. There is a powerful tradition, Stoic, Buddhist, certain currents of existentialist thought, that argues the disciplined restraint of emotional expression is not a wound, but a practice. Marcus Aurelius did not write about integrating his shadow. He wrote about returning to duty. He wrote about the soul's capacity to remain unmoved. And he was not describing a man in denial. He was describing a man who had made a conscious choice about where to place the weight of his attention. The psychotherapist and writer James Hollis, who has written extensively on Jungian thought, acknowledges this tension. Not every form of containment is avoidance. Not every silent man is repressing terror. Some silences are chosen, some composure is earned, and the existentialist position, particularly in the work of Viktor Frankl, is that meaning can be extracted even from suffering that is not processed but simply endured. There is a dignity in that. So here is the harder question, the one this philosophy ultimately demands. How do you tell the difference? How do you distinguish between chosen discipline and unconscious flight? How do you know whether your composure is a practice or a prison? The answer, unsatisfying as it is, cannot be delivered as a rule. It arrives only through a specific kind of honest attention. Attention to what happens in the body when certain doors get close to opening. Composure that is a practice tends to be available. You can lay it down when the situation calls for it. Composure that is a prison is not available at all. It is not that you choose not to open the door. It is that you have forgotten there is a door. Marcus had forgotten there was a door. Chapter 6. The collapse. That was not a collapse. It did not happen dramatically. The moments that change the interior of a person rarely do. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary project debrief that ran long. Nadia made a comment, not about Marcus, not even particularly pointed, about how the team tended to avoid naming problems directly. "We've gotten very good," she said with a kind of measured calm, "at talking around the thing instead of at the thing." Something in Marcus's chest went still. Not the irritation this time. Something older. His palms were wet, his throat closed slightly, that half swallow of a person trying not to show they have been struck. He excused himself from the meeting 8 minutes early with a flawless professional explanation. He walked to the stairwell, not the elevator, the stairwell, 11 floors, and by the time he reached the bottom, his heart was doing something irregular, and his hands were shaking in a way that had no reasonable cause. He sat on the bottom step for 20 minutes. He did not know why. There was nothing logically wrong. The meeting had been fine. He had performed flawlessly, and still something inside him was behaving like a structure that has lost a load-bearing wall. Not collapsed, not yet, but making the sounds that precede it. The slight groan in the beams, the hairline fracture. He sat with his back against the cold concrete and felt for the first time in perhaps 20 years the full weight of how much effort it took to be Marcus. Not the work effort, the other effort, the effort of containment, the daily exhausting, invisible labor of keeping certain doors closed. For 20 minutes he allowed himself to not know what to do. This sounds small. For him, it was enormous. Chapter 7. The Logic of the Shadow. And why integration is not therapy speak. There is a word that gets used in psychological discourse so frequently and with such casual imprecision that it has nearly lost its meaning. Integration. People use it to mean self-acceptance, or emotional processing, or simply feeling better. But in the tradition of depth psychology, integration means something specific and demanding. It means readmitting what was exiled, not performing acceptance of it, not intellectually acknowledging it in a journal, actually allowing it back into the room of the self with all the disorder and discomfort that involves. For Marcus, integration did not begin with therapy, though therapy eventually became part of it. It began with a single act that sounds absurdly simple. He finished a novel, the one he had started and abandoned 3 times over 2 years. He read the final 40 pages on a Sunday afternoon, and when the protagonist lost the person they had spent the entire book loving, Marcus put the book down on his lap and wept, quietly, for approximately 90 seconds. Then he sat in the stillness that followed and noticed something unexpected. Not relief exactly, but a kind of spaciousness. As if a room inside him that had been packed with furniture had had something removed, and there was suddenly space to move. This is what depth psychology has consistently found, and what the philosopher Paul Ricoeur described as the second naivete, the state of having known enough to be skeptical, and then having moved through skepticism into a more complex, earned engagement with the fundamental human experiences: grief, need, love, fear. The first time you cry over a story, you are simply open. The second time, after years of armoring, after the long work of dismantling what the armor cost you, You are choosing to be open. That is a different act entirely. One is innocence. The other is courage. Chapter 8. The Shadow in the Social World. What began in the stairwell and in the pages of a novel began to move outward, the way thaws always do, slowly, unevenly, with returns to cold. Marcus did not become a different person. He did not acquire a suddenly vibrant emotional vocabulary or begin speaking earnestly about his feelings in meetings. The transformation was quieter and more structural than that. He stopped canceling plans at the last minute, not because he gave himself a rule about it, but because he started noticing, before the impulse arrived, what the impulse actually was. A reaching for the familiar safety of isolation, the closed room, the controlled environment of solitude. He could see it coming now, and seeing it gave him a fraction of a second that he had never had before.
The fraction in which something approaching choice existed. Not always, not reliably, but sometimes. He also changed something in how he moved through professional environments. He stopped engineering his performance so comprehensively. He allowed himself, in small but real ways, to be wrong in public, to say, "I don't know yet," instead of the carefully constructed response that implied he always knew. These were not grand gestures. They were small, structural, daily. The kind of change that has no single visible moment, but accumulates the way water shapes stone, invisibly, continuously, over time. And something shifted with Nadia. Not into friendship, not immediately. But the low-grade irritation evaporated. What replaced it was something he recognized, with a discomfort he chose to sit with, as respect. She had not changed. He had simply stopped needing her to be wrong. Chapter 9. What the Shadow Asks of You. The philosopher Albert Camus wrote that the absurd is born from the confrontation between the human need for clarity and the world's unreasonable silence. There is a parallel confrontation that occurs in the interior, between the self that was built for survival and the self that was never allowed to exist. This confrontation, when it finally arrives, tends to feel less like an insight and more like a loss, because something does have to be lost. The carefully maintained performance of not needing is not free. It costs the thing it claims to protect, the actual self. What shadow work demands is not that you become emotional or expressive or vulnerable in the ways that contemporary culture sometimes insists upon with its own brand of performance. It does not ask you to broadcast your interior life. What it asks is simpler and more difficult, that you stop pretending to yourself that the interior life does not exist, that you stop mistaking the absence of expressed feeling for the absence of feeling, that you stop calling your armoring your character. Jung, near the end of his life, wrote that the gold is in the shadow. He meant that the qualities we have repressed are not only the painful ones, the grief, the need, the rage, but also the unlived capacities. The creativity that was too wild for the household. The tenderness that was too risky for the environment. The ambition that felt too large for the permitted self. These too live in the shadow. And their absence is felt as a kind of gray weather that is always present but never commented upon. A muted life that cannot locate the source of its own muteness. Chapter 10. The Fragmented Return. Marcus is 35 now. He still rises early. He is still reliable, still competent, still composed in the ways that the world recognizes and rewards. But there is something different in the interior architecture. Not a demolition, but a renovation. A room that was sealed is now occasionally open. He enters it, sometimes willingly, sometimes because something pulls him there, and he sits with what he finds without immediately reaching for the door. He read Jung eventually. He found it uncomfortable in the specific way that true things tend to be uncomfortable, not because they are unfamiliar, but because they named something you have always sensed without language. He did not find answers in it so much as a more precise map of the territory he had been navigating by intuition. He also found Frankl and Heidegger's concept of authenticity, the idea that authentic existence requires a confrontation with what is genuinely one's own, rather than what has been inherited, performed, or socially assigned. He thinks sometimes about the 7-year-old at the dinner table. Not with pity. Pity is another form of distance, but with something closer to understanding. The child who learned to close certain doors did what any intelligent creature does in an uncertain environment, adapted. The cost of that adaptation was not failure, it was latency. The parts of the self that were closed off did not disappear. They waited. With a patience that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with the nature of what it means to be human, which is to say, more than can be contained in any single performance of self, no matter how carefully constructed. The shadow does not ask to be celebrated. It asks to be acknowledged. That is all. The psychological literature on this subject, from Freud's early work on repression, through Jung's structural elaboration of the unconscious, through the contemporary trauma research of Bessel van der Kolk, converges on a single observation. The repressed self does not simply want expression. It wants recognition. It wants to be seen by the one person who has most consistently refused to see it. You. This is not a comfortable undertaking. It is not designed to make you feel better in the short term. In fact, the early stages of genuine shadow confrontation tend to make things feel worse, because what you are doing is removing the anesthetic from a wound that has been numbed for a very long time. The grief that arrives when the armor comes down is real. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something is finally, imperfectly, going right. What you build on the other side of that grief is not a new self. It is the original one. Augmented, complicated, caring more than the sanitized version ever could, but also more capable of genuine contact with other people, with beauty, with the full register of what a human life actually contains. Less controlled, more alive. The shadow ran your life because it was the only part of you strong enough to keep functioning when everything else had to be hidden. That is not your enemy. That is your most loyal, most misunderstood collaborator. The work is not to destroy it. The work is to finally introduce yourself.